Well, Mr. President, you said that if the Supreme Court said someone needed to be returned, that you would abide by that. You said that on Air Force One just a few days ago. And they said that it must be facilitated.
Why don't you just say, isn't it wonderful that we're keeping criminals out of our country? Why can't you just say that? Why do you go over and over? And that's why nobody watches you anymore. You have no credibility. Please go ahead.
Bobby Jones here again from MeidasTouch Network and Valor Media Group. What you just saw in the clip before was the meeting of two heads of state, the President of the United States and the President of El Salvador. And while on the surface, this seemed like a normal, formal meeting between two heads of state, it's really a snapshot of a troubling trend that's been going on for the last 20 years. The last few decades, the world globally has seen a trend in the rise of what we call autocracies. Autocracies, very simply put, is one person that rules over all branches of government. There are no free elections. If elections are held, they're overwhelmingly rigged for the person in power to retain power. Or there is a system to which, even if the person was to leave, like in Russia, they return very quickly to reassert their dominance and to continue their policies. It is quite simply a monarchy with darker tendencies. Now, that being said, the United States, the last 3 months, has been under heavy scrutiny by the rest of the world, and for good reason. With the current administration coming into power, there have been things that lead you down a very distinct path of an autocratic government. How do we know this? Well, let's start with some of history's most recent autocracies and how they came to power. Let's start by using the example most people will use nowadays, and that is the rise of Hitler during Germany's interwar years in the 1930s. Now, it's very simple to focus on the carnage that man created while he led Germany. But in this case, I want us to focus on how he obtained the power. Hitler rose to power through legitimate democratic norms. Through elections, he organized a party. But once he got to a certain level, basically the number 2 in Germany, he enacted emergency powers because he said Germany was in such dire straits, drastic action needs to be taken. And only he, and he alone, can fix those problems. That sounds very familiar, not just here in the United States, but other dictators throughout history, that they are the only ones that can solve the problem. And because of using those emergency powers, he was able to overrun the parliamentary body there, replace law enforcement, and replace military leaders with his own hand-select loyalists. Again, sounds familiar. When you fast forward to, the 2010s, and you look at Hungary and Viktor Orban, he did something that the current administration in the United States and other dictators like Vladimir Putin have used, and that is delegitimizing the media, stripping them of all of their power, censoring them, throwing opposition media leaders in jail. This is something Putin was notorious for. This is something that Viktor Orban has done. And this is something that Trump in the United States tries to do in his very limited way. When you can sit there and say fake news, fake news, fake news to any truth, and you have a loud enough megaphone and you repeat it often, eventually the citizens may start to believe you. And then once you have the media neutralized or in your pocket, you can do things like weaken the checks and balances of government, which is what happened in Hungary, which is happening in real time in the United States. And in Hungary's case, they rewrote the election laws, allowing Orban to retain power. It's quite masterful how he's done this. Trump, once again, taking plays from that playbook, is trying to do the same thing. So for those who don't know, there is a report that comes out every year. I'm going to mention it here and show you guys what I'm talking about. The VDEM report. The VDEM report comes from the University of Gothenburg in Sweden. And in this report, they have thousands of political scientists and subject matter experts that consistently monitor the happenings of government in all the countries of the world. It's unbelievable. It is a very, very urgent and needed project, one of many I'm sure that are out there, but they do it where they have specific metrics to measure democracy versus autocracy. And the United States in the last year has continued to skyrocket in the rise of autocratic behavior. However, that's just a snapshot of something that has been happening now for the last 30 years. According to these subject matter experts, the world has 72% of its population living under autocratic rule. 72%. And when you count the numbers of governments and the different metrics they use, we have returned to a 1985 status of government worldwide, when the Soviet Union was still a thing and the Cold War was still going on. How are they going and looking at these? You can definitely take a look at their website, but I want you to focus on the civil liberties, the reduction of judicial independence, the tolerance of political violence. These things have ramped up. To put these numbers in more stark and relatable terms, there are 91 autocracies versus 88 democracies as of January 1st, 2025. Freedom of expression around the world declined in 44 countries just in the year 2024. What does that mean? Meaning people being locked up for expressing themselves freely in their society. And the other rise that we've seen are elections that are taking place, but there's no meaningful opposition due to the intimidation that the ruling party has. That should terrify everybody worldwide, and in the United States. No matter where you are, you want to have opposition to power so the best ideas and directions for that society can come to the forefront.
There's not enough men like me who do whatever they want.
Are you sick of it yet?
Those people need to be, when we take power, they need to be given the death penalty.
The anger.
I live like a capitalist every single day, Shank. I live as a capitalist.
The hate.
And we have a system of checks and balances. That's a good one. That's really funny. We do?
The idea that to be a man, you have to be a bully.
Fuck you!
We should be better than this.
Females don't have independent thought. They don't come up with anything.
Our kids deserve better than this.
It's like women want equal rights when it's convenient, but then they still want the door open for them.
So help us change it. Subscribe to Valor Media Network, where you can find shows on sports, men's health, and patriotism without the resentment and division.
True strength is about discipline, resilience, and service.
If you've wondered where all the positive role models are, especially for young men, check out Navy SEAL Dan Barkov and Commander Bobby Jones as they share stories of service and sacrifice.
Being good at being a man is about what you do for others and not what you do for yourself.
Listen to Jason Kander and co-hosts Ravi Gupta and Adisu Demisi give you the inside track on the politics of sports.
I just want to take back what I said about the Bills. No, because in all honesty, your team seems to have gotten the vaccination thing right. Okay. My team seems to be struggling with it.
These shows and many more from Valor Media Network prove that you don't have to be an asshole to connect with young men today. Subscribe to Valor Media Network today.
Let's look specifically at the United States and how the authoritarian playbook has been brought to the forefront since January 20th of 2025. Let's start with the Supreme Court and how the Trump administration, the chief executive, meaning execute, has chosen not to execute court orders at various levels of government, to include the Supreme Court of the United States. Recently, there was a 9-0 decision that was passed by the Supreme Court of the United States to bring back a mistakenly deported immigrant. We just saw in that first clip I showed you, the president of the United States say he's not going to do it. And then he punted to the El Salvadorian president, and he backed up that decision. That is a direct defiance of the Supreme Court. No efforts made to even try to follow through on the decision. Okay. Another thing that autocrats do, they use military troops whenever possible, right? In this case, as I mentioned before, border patrols, right? All that does is send a message of intimidation. And really, it neuters the Custom Border Patrol agents who have trained their entire careers to execute that mission. It's not about just protecting the borders. It's about sending a message. And while that's happening, there have been no increases in judges. There have been no increases of personnel that can properly handle those who are flooding to the border, trying to get asylum. But as I just mentioned, even if they try to get asylum, it looks like that does not work because there is no due process being offered to these people. And that is how autocrats can mass manipulate populations by denying them rights. In the United States case, their due process of rights as immigrants or as anybody claiming asylum. You can then move these people wherever you want and with no regard to their health, their safety, their families, etc. And to be completely honest, it's a violation not only of American law to treat anybody without due process. It's a violation of human rights as defined by the United Nations. And so for the United States government, led by the current administration, to deny these basic fundamental truths, that is a very autocratic way of doing business because only one person's opinion seems to matter, and that is the person at the top, in this case, the President of the United States. The other thing that's happening is this DEI crackdown, and I've talked about this in past videos. Whenever you try to remove a minority group, that is an autocratic behavior that is undeniable. Whether you're talking about the Jews in Germany in the 1930s, whether you're talking about various ethnic and religious groups throughout Europe, throughout its history, or whether or not you're talking about minority groups here in the United States that literally helped build the country. Whenever you try to remove their history and minimize their impact, that is someone trying to convey a message of superiority. And then it bleeds into education and it's bled into the military. It's bled into government, who gets hired and who doesn't. It's a very, very penetrating effect. So I often get the question, man, this is bad. What can you do? You have to hold your local representatives, your members of Congress, your governors of your state, if you're in the United States, accountable. You have to continue to demand accountability from your government. Because Congress's sole purpose is to check the president. Well, it's not their sole purpose, but it's one of their primary major functions is to check the president of the United States and that whole thing of checks and balances. That's what you can do. Keep the heat on them so they can start to put the heat on the president. Right now, Congress is abdicating its authority and not doing its job as a collective. You have bits and pieces, certain members here, people traveling and trying to gin up resistance to these things. But overall, Congress is failing miserably at its job. And here's the scary part. Once you cross the Rubicon into an autocracy, it is extremely hard to get that back. Extremely hard. Please comment below and let me know what you think. I'm just trying to lay out some of the things that we need to be looking at. And most importantly, this is a global trend. And it seems like the United States is now a new emerging leader in that trend.
New Meidas merch drop. Check out the latest pro-democracy sticker packs, t-shirts, hats, sweatshirts, and more. All at store.MeidasTouch.com.